from the news. It's not like that, cause it's a thing. It is something that you do. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Dib-on, baby, diddle-on. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do.
What's up, everybody? It's Jeremiah Hosea, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host today, Brother Craig Blue. Say hello, please.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Today we have an incredible guest again, and I'm so excited to get into this conversation. I've been learning so much this week in preparation for this show. I try to be a Renaissance man as well as I can. I'm an amateur historian in my own right. I think we should all study history as well as we can. And today's guest helps provide us with a historical framework that is a very powerful thing to encounter. Today's guest, Steven Newcomb, is going to introduce us, if we haven't been familiarized with the concept already, with the Christian doctrine of discovery, which is equivalent, as we're going to find out, to the doctrine of domination. And we're going to talk about how this mindset plays out in everyday life, how this sort of juggernaut that created what we call American civilization has not been stopped at any point. That colonist mentality, that imperialist mentality, it has continued to this day. Of course, we've gotten more sophisticated superficially. We have more technology now. We have more ways of deluding ourselves. But that monstrosity has never been addressed. The train was never taken off the track. And my good friend Craig Blue, as we discussed on Bassline episode 6, has a particular attitude about the holidays. And we've had this conversation for years, so it's going to be really exciting to have Steven Newcomb provide some scholarship to support our conversation. So, Brother Blue, how did you enjoy your holiday that I refer to as no thanks taking?
Well, you know, because it's a time where people are released from work and can see family. I saw my family. My brother and his wife took a good friend of ours, Carlos Galeanos, another bass player, wonderful musician, and we broke bread with family. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And on the line, we'd like to introduce our guest, Brother Steven Newcomb. How are you today, Steven?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on your show, and really looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise. So we want to introduce the audience to your scholarship, basically. You've written some books with some very powerful titles. You are a foremost authority in regard to papal documents that go back centuries, that provide us with a framework of a lot of what we witness in the world today. So can you just introduce us basically to the doctrine of discovery, which, as you'll explain, translates to a doctrine of domination? The floor is yours.
Oh, sure. Well, I'm the author of one book, Pagans in the Promised Land, Decoding the Doctrine of Christian Discovery, and co-producer of a documentary movie, The Doctrine of Discovery, Unmasking the Domination Code, by my directed by my friend Sheldon Wolfchild. And I am Shawnee and Lenape, Delawensa, Steve Newcomb, Lula Linda Melipalk. It's a greeting to say I'm glad to reach out to all of you that are gathered here today for your show. And the effort to understand this goes back to my teenage years. And when I read a book called Bury My Heart, It Wounded Me by D. Brown, back, I think it was published in 1970. And I'll get into some of that, a little bit of personal history briefly. But before I do that, I wanted to begin by setting the context for this conversation. I think that's very crucial. And that context, as I understand it, begins with our free and independent existence, extending back to the beginning of time through our oral histories and oral traditions as the original nations of this Turtle Island continent. And the contrast between that free existence and the system of domination that was brought by ship across the ocean, by many ships actually, and imposed on everyone and everything. And once we set out that contrast, then we also have the view from the shore, looking out at those ships sailing toward shore invasively. And we also have the view from the ship, looking at our ancestors. And once we have those four perspectives, then we have a very deep and meaningful starting point for a conversation, because most people never think back to an original free existence. They're just in the midst of whatever we're in these days. And for a long time, I never thought of that either. I just would begin with the Vatican papal bulls and so forth, and U.S. Supreme Court rulings. But over time, when I learned from my friend and mentor Virgil Kilstrate, a traditional Oglala Lakota elder and educator and ceremonial person, I had the good fortune to work with Virgil for more than 25 years. And Virgil was a fluent Oglala Lakota language speaker and understood the origin story and the wisdom, the deep, deep wisdom and understanding of his people. And I was so fortunate to be able to learn from him and many other traditional elders and spiritual people. So that influences my work, my effort to also engage in scholarship and so forth. The way I guess I would begin is to, as far as the system of domination that you've so sensibly identified right away, it starts out with those Vatican documents that were issued shortly, maybe 50 years before Columbus, going back to 1452 and 55 and so forth, a bunch of dates back in the 1400s. And the documents are directed initially at the western coast of Africa and to the Muslim world. And but it's instructing or supposedly authorizing the King of Portugal to go to the western coast of Africa, and as Pope Nicholas V states, for the monarch of Portugal to go to the western coast of Africa and to invade, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery and take away all their possessions and property. And when we look at each of those terms, we go deep into each and every one of those terms, and we try to think about, what do all of these have in common? Over the course of many decades, about four decades now, I eventually understood that all of these loop right back to the theme of domination, which of course is being compelled to live subject to the will of someone else, and or being made to basically to live under coercion and some kind of dictatorial rule, right? That's what domination is. You can think of it as a foot on the neck of someone who is being held under control and force. And so the way in which those terms in Latin, very important to go into Latin with all this, but they play out in many of those documents, and without getting too specific with all the dates and so forth. But right after Columbus set sail, otherwise known as Cristobal Colon, set sail, he successfully went across the Atlantic Ocean to the Bahamas and back to the Iberian Peninsula. And when the King and Queen of Spain found out what he had succeeded in doing, they appealed to the Pope to issue documents to them, or a document specifically, to affirm for them the right to take possession, as it's usually stated, of those lands that Columbus had located, and so the Pope did that. Pope Alexander VI did that. But there were 4 different documents issued at that time in 1493. And without getting too much into detail, basically the Pope is talking about the propagation of the Christian empire, Christiani Imperii Propagationem, and to the reduction or subjugation of the barbarous nations, ac barbarae nationes deprimantur. Deprimantur comes from the Latin word deprimo, meaning to press down, hold down, keep down. So that's where that idea of oppression comes in. And so this is the more terminology of domination. And in fact, when you go deep into the documents, and I don't have this particular sentence memorized in Latin, in the original Latin, but I have the English translated. In the May 3rd Papal Bull, I guess it's the May 4th Papal Bull, there's a sentence in the document that says, "We trust in him," capital H on him, so that's talking about their deity, "from whom empires and dominations and all good things proceed." Now, when you go and look at the English translation of that, it actually is listed as governments. But eventually I had the good sense to compare the English and the Latin back and forth, and when I looked for the Latin word for governments, it was dominationes, dominations. So I simply stated in my own way to translate it in that manner. So flash forward over a long period of time, you have the monarchs of England and France joining in. So you've got England, France, Portugal, Spain. You've got, to some extent, Holland, and you've got Russia and so forth. You've got all of those colonizing powers over a period of centuries that are following the same patterning of claiming a right of domination over any places that don't yet have Christian domination established there. And that's what is referred to by discovery. It's the effort to identify those geographical locations where non-Christians are living and where Christian domination has not yet been established or constituted, as they say. There's a sentence in the Papal Bull that talks about the que sub actuali dominio temporale aliquorum dominorum Christianorum constitute non essent, which is just basically saying that, where domination has not yet been constituted or established and maintained. So when you look at all the English charters and French charters and royal charters, various royal charters, that idea that they have a right of domination following from the chosen people in the promised land, the Bible, is utilized over the course of centuries. And of course, all the profit motive and greed and everything that's mixed in there as the real impetus. But when you finally come to the establishment of the United States and the American Empire, as the U.S. Supreme Court has referred to it 2 different times, one in 1820 and one in 1901, you see that the same pattern has been used by the United States government, specifically the U.S. Supreme Court in 1823, in a case called Johnson versus McIntosh. And this is the 200-year mark of that decision. And Chief Justice John Marshall, on behalf of the unanimous court, actually said that the first Christian people to identify lands inhabited by natives who were heathens have the ultimate dominion. They have the right to ascribe to themselves the ultimate dominion, and the native peoples, or the so-called heathens, only have a right and title of occupancy, meaning they can live there, but they don't own it. And this is where it gets very interesting, because the word own and ownership goes to the concept of property, obviously. And just to wrap this all up, and I'll pause at this after I make this statement, that once you look at the idea of property and you look very specifically at the definition, there are several that are important, one of them by William Blackstone in his commentaries on the common law, and it refers to property as despotic dominion, which is obviously domination, and he traces it to Genesis 1:28 in the Bible, subdue and dominate, as Richard Friedman translates it. And then also you have in the Ballantyne's Law Dictionary from 1969 the definition of not the material object itself, but the right of domination rightfully obtained over such object. And then the book by Lance Liebman and Charles Monroe Haar, titled Property and Law, they refer to property as the first establishment of socially approved physical domination over some part of the natural world. So what's been going on, and the whole basis of the United States, of state systems throughout the planet, what I call the global system of domination, is that there have been elite, powerful financial and political interests that have been able to take their claim of right of domination and use that against everyone and everything for profit and for increased power and so forth. And that's the context in which we find ourselves today, no matter what particular issue we're dealing with.
Outstanding. Wow. You really set us straight right there, Professor Newcomb. Yeah, that's outstanding. I want to say, first of all, I have Native American blood myself. My grandfather, who my son is named after, Dr. Marcus McBroom, had a Cherokee grandmother who he actually grew up with on a farm in Ohio. He said she was as mean as hell, but he loved her. That was his grandmother. And somehow I heard we have Blackfoot. I don't know where the Blackfoot comes into play, but I grew up being told I have Cherokee and Blackfoot blood, and I was very proud of that. And I also had a babysitter who was a full-blooded Mohawk, Lorraine Canoe, who was a huge influence in my life. I was just very proud of my Mohawk babysitter, and I went upstate to the reservation, Akwesasne, I believe it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And
sure.
I spent some time there as a child. That was very impactful, going to an outhouse, seeing...
You mean a longhouse?
Well, no, using the outhouse, actually. Like, no indoor bathroom.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
You know, I mean, you grow up in the city and, you know.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying.
It's pretty startling to be like, hey, wait, you know, you go to this little shack up there to use the bathroom and throw some lye on top when you're done.
Yeah.
But I've always been mystified by indigenous culture. I've always been impressed by it. And I think it's so essential that we address these truths. I don't believe we can gloss over the fundamental truth of the situation. I believe what you're saying is extremely powerful. I'm very proud to have you as a guest on this program. And my friend Craig Blue is not here by accident as well, because the indigenous consciousness has always been a part of our ongoing conversation. Mm-hmm. He introduced me to a really powerful book many years ago that had a big influence on me called Touch the Earth. Mm-hmm. That was a book of Native American spirituality. And Blue would get into these arguments with people who would try to press Western religion, Christian religion on us. And I remember one time I was so amused and impressed with Blue when he was arguing with someone. I can't remember who he was arguing with, but someone was going into their Christian doctrine stuff. And Blue, I guess, was a little bit fed up by then. And he just said, look, take this book. And he handed them the book, Touch the Earth. He says, this book, this is what I believe. And one thing I remember from that book is he said, or I don't remember who he was because there was different voices who were shared in the text, different individuals from different groups. But one person I remember saying, look, your Bible is a man-made book. You can lay it down on the ground, and eventually the sun and the rain and the wind will get to it. The insects will eventually help that book be absorbed right back into the earth. My Bible is the whole of creation. He said, I wake up and I open my arms to the sun. I dive into the river bodily. This is my Bible. So I think we should also remember that before the written word, there's also a planet Earth that's right under our feet. Mm-hmm. And before we get into abstractions, we should acknowledge that. Brother Blue, what would you like to say here?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, Stephen. It's wonderful to hear you lay it out for myself and the listeners. And my mom had Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And I read that book when I was in my early 20s, probably 2021. And that changed my perspective. I have a great-grandfather from Georgia, the Prince family, and he was part African, part Cherokee. And on my mom's side, Floridians we have some Seminole heritage down there, some fighters. So in reading that book that my mom didn't even remember that she had on the shelf, I saw it, and it absolutely changed my life. I even did an art piece about 1868 and the walk of natives in the snow and frozen bodies. All these things just were seared on my mind after reading this book. And outside of African American activism, Marcus Garvey, Dr. John Henrik Clark, the Black Panther socialist movement, I became more in tune with the indigenous fight for land and for restitution, with lands taken illegally, in my view, basically stolen from these people. And so that also changed my whole idea about activism outside of just being a person of African descent, but also having some roots with my indigenous family. And and I don't think and I just learned about the doctrine of discovery, and that there's people protesting as we speak that the Pope and the Vatican decline that and stop that. And most of us don't know that doctrine is still, and that mindset is still in effect today, and they will not stop.
Absolutely. And I want to use that to segue into the fact that yesterday was no thanks taking, as I like to call it. And I have to say, it was the most awkward no thanks taking I've ever had. At this point in my life, I just don't like playing along. I just feel awkward about it. When people say, Happy Thanksgiving, I don't even want to say the words. I just nod. I say, thank you, you too. But I want to explain to them, this is not right. We really shouldn't be celebrating a massacre, and we shouldn't be actively engaged in hypocrisy. So can you give us a rundown a little bit, or your take as an indigenous scholar on the holiday that is generally called Thanksgiving, that I call no thanks taking? Could you please provide us with, some historical insight, but also how do you feel about it personally as an indigenous person? How do you feel experiencing what we experience on that day?
It's kind of interesting because as I began to mull it over in my mind as far as what I might say in response to this question, I don't really have much of a response. I don't have a great deal of specific historical insight into that time. I know that the Mashpee, Wampanoag people and the people of that area in what's now called Massachusetts, that the way in which they remember that is involving a very terrible massacre that they experienced. And I've talked with some of them about that. And it's, of course, the way in which any of us, as people that come from original nations, are able to think back on our history and think of the various atrocities that were committed against our peoples. The average everyday person, I'm sure, is not thinking of those types of things as the point of what they're sitting down to as far as a meal and all that. But the point ought to be that it would be really wonderful if people would have a deeper insight into the true nature of the history of the United States and not only deal with things on a superficial level. I think the other part of it that's kind of ironic or interesting is that being thankful for life, being thankful for creation, as was stated a bit ago by Craig, is one of our tenets. I mean, we have the whole point of being thankful for every single day, and also the principle of generosity. And I think that if those colonists had not been greeted by people that actually had integrity and had the right understanding of how to behave beneficially toward one another and all living things, they would have just been wiped out when they first set foot on shore. But instead they were welcomed, as my friend Virgil points out in our documentary movie. And so that principle of generosity and hospitality has, in a sense, worked against us to a great extent. And I think that as more and more people become aware of the correct understanding of history, from our vantage point anyway, those of us that study these things, that perhaps they will have more compassion, not just for our peoples, but for all peoples. I mean, I think that's the whole key point, is that we have original instructions and teachings that guide us, and the point is to live in a manner that's beneficial to one another and all living things. And the tenets that, or teachings that Virgil taught me, the 7 laws, Uope, and, for example, to care in your heart, or to be generous, and to have compassion for others, for all living things, and to have patience and fortitude and bravery and courage, and to have, seek wisdom and understanding, and to live according to the laws and the understandings of the right way to live. That's crucial to where we need to go. I think when we look at so many conflicts in the world, I wonder, what is the model for that other peoples have for what is a healthy way to live and a healthy existence?
Great
because
point.
It seems to me that all the destruction of standards is one of the most dire and diabolical things that has happened over the course of the last several generations. It's been going on for a long time, but there's an acceleration, it seems to me, that whether it's, any kind of standard, I don't care what it is.
Sure.
If the corporations are able to contaminate all the food, then there's no category called organic.
Right.
Because it's all contaminated. And it just seems to me that we have to have models of positivity and models of beauty and truth and just being a good person that ought to guide us. But you look at how much madness and insanity there is in the world, it's very unfortunate. So I think, anyway, I don't have too much to say about Thanksgiving particularly in terms of a specific rundown on exactly how that came to pass. But those are the general comments that I have at the moment.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
That's outstanding. And this show is a medical freedom themed show. We make no mistake about that. We make no apologies about that, because I lived here in New York City. I was a teacher for 20 years. I taught mostly young people how to play chess. I'm a bass player who's played in venues all around the city and many venues around the country and in various venues around the world. And all of a sudden I was prevented from making my income right as I was expecting my second child. I had a young son and a daughter on the way, and I'm suddenly the boxer getting thrown in the ring with his hands tied behind his back. I'm being prevented from making my income. And then I'm being told, oh, wait, for you to return to teaching and to return to performing, you have to take experimental drugs to return to your job. And I, couldn't believe that was the environment that I found myself in. And I couldn't believe that many of my comrades or former comrades, I don't know where we stand now in a lot of cases, completely, I'm sorry, I don't mince words, sold out to this regime. I couldn't believe it. I thought, wait a second, is this regime that's giving us these experimental emergency, quote unquote, interventions into our bodies, is this different than the government that bombed Iraq, that bombed Libya, that bombed Afghanistan? Is it different than the government that couldn't fix the water situation in Flint?
True,
so
indeed.
You can't fix something that's going on in a town, but you're going to fix something for the whole wide world. You didn't come up with a cure for cancer. You don't have a cure for the common cold, but you're going to whip together a cure for the super cold and make me take it. So I know that you've made some comments expressing what I would identify as a medical freedom sort of sentiment. I'm very curious about your reaction to the COVID regime as it emerged, the COVID agenda, and also your up-to-date thoughts about COVID as far as where we stand now and all that we've been through. So I guess, what was your reaction and where do we stand now from your perspective?
Well, I think I have a free and independent existence perspective on all that. An original free existence perspective. The thing that's really critically important for my way of thinking about all this is the right to inquire into what's actually going on and has been going on. And I think that when you have a situation where people are being coerced through the system of domination into taking a particular course of action without being informed, they cannot possibly give informed consent if they're not informed. But this is one of those standards that seems to be thrown out the window or destroyed, that there's no such thing as informed consent. And this is the problem with an authoritarian or totalitarian setup, because it's total control and it's whatever the authorities say is good for you. You have to take their word for it. And there's no right to question or challenge or think or speak out or whatever. And so that's really what we're seeing is, I think, and I mentioned this in the end of my book, toward the end of my book, that seemed to be the direction that everything was headed in as of 2008 when my book came out. And certainly that has come to pass. So I think that those of us who have had the good sense and the opportunity to really delve into all these things, probably anyone that's really been looking will see that this is something that has a nefarious intent. And, you know, there's a lot of ways we can to express that nefarious intent. But my goodness, why in the world should people be compelled to do something that doesn't make sense? But you're not going to get certain people to think about these things because they don't like to think at all anyway. And even some of my very smartest friends went, and who I highly admire, but when it came to some of these types of things, we had a very big divergence in terms of how we came down on all this, you know. So, and I'm being very, very straight up about that. People that don't want to think or don't perhaps know how to think, it's not, you know, I'm not trying to be mean about it, but when you see someone driving around in their car with a mask on, with their windows rolled down, you got to wonder what in the world's going on.
True indeed.
Good point. Good example.
Or people that are walking around in a heavy breeze and they got a mask on.
Right.
It's like, how in the world are you going to get any kind of whatever communicable anything in that kind of a weather situation? So those are just some initial comments, but I think it's horrific that anyone would be coerced into getting something that has not been substantiated in any way, shape, or form as being safe. I called Moderna, as a matter of fact, at one point, and I happened to have a sheet that my friend had given me. He got the shot, and so he sent me a photo of this sheet. And so I called Moderna, and I said, yeah, I have this sheet with these ingredients on here, but I'm having a difficult time making sense of them. And so is there a way I can research this information? And the pharmacist said no. And that's something that will have to be dealt with by your primary care physician. And eventually I ended up saying, well, now if my primary care physician recommends that I get the shot, on what basis will he or she be recommending it as being safe? And at that point, the pharmacist hung up. I guess that word safe is not a pretty word to them,
Right. Well, two things come to mind quickly that I want to mention, which is, we were talking about this on the way over here, which is you can't say emergency use authorization and then say safe and effective, because emergency use authorization means we're not sure. It means rush through the regulatory process. It means it was not scrutinized so that we cannot, refer to this product with any level of certainty. So there's a contradiction right there in the safe and effective claim to state this so certainly when you can't be certain. That's what emergency use authorization means.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many details with this, and Sasha Latipova, I think her research is just extraordinary.
I agree.
And when we go into that in detail, it was never intended to be safe or effective. That wasn't even part of the mix, right?
Right.
And so, what this actually is, or getting to an approximation of what it is, we can certainly say what it isn't. And that it isn't safe or effective, and now we're seeing tremendous, horrific statistics for those of us that are able to pay attention,
right,
as to the real harm that's being caused. And it's just, I mean, at a certain point, there's almost no words as to how horrific this thing is.
Yeah, seriously.
Nefarious. You did say nefarious.
And that was a great choice of words, because, the things that we're witnessing at this point, first of all, folks, there are documentaries. There's several full-length documentaries about the harms of these things. There are people just shaking and stuttering, and people whose lives are ravaged by neurological disorders. We have oncologists saying this is increasing rates of cancer, that they're seeing people who are being diagnosed initially with stage 4 cancers. That
young people with
nowhere.
myocarditis.
Yeah.
Young people.
Young
teenagers.
People. Yeah. People dropping on the soccer field. First ever heart attack in the history of Monday Night Football, the history of the NFL, period. There's never been a football game that was stopped because a player had a heart attack. With all those insane injuries that they have, they stopped the game and said, this brother was about to die.
Sure.
They revived him on the field. So there's so many indications that something's going wrong, and for some reason, the people who push this agenda, they are so disciplined, they remain unfazed.
But then our friends, what we would think would be highly astute, intelligent people, looked at us when we said there has to be a problem with this. We're being offered something. We're being offered a vaccination, but we're not being offered health care. We're not being offered so many other things that need to be addressed in just communities in general, whether it's black, white, Asian, in communities in general, but we're being asked, now we're being mandated to take a vaccination that totally ignores our indigenous body rights and sovereignty. And then we're being punished for it by losing work, losing income, not being able to provide for our families, not me and you not being able to teach anymore, me teaching art, you teaching chess. And then it goes about dominion over my body. Who has dominion over my body?
And for people to not understand how other people wouldn't feel comfortable with that type of arrangement.
Exactly.
Like, okay, you want to be experimented on. You're gung-ho about science, and you want to be experimented on. Okay, well, that's you. But you despise me for not wanting to be experimented on, for being suspicious?
And in particular with a country that has a history of experimenting on its citizens, on its unaware or misinformed or uninformed citizens, you got to step, come on. And pharmaceutical companies that have histories of billions of dollars of lawsuits for products that have actually killed people.
Right, like no one's ever heard of a class action lawsuit. No one's ever heard of a tire recall. Like to claim that things are perfectly safe when you're dealing with mass manufacturing, when you're dealing with the administration of a product, when there's a chain link of events where so many things could go wrong at any level. Like, one of the red flags for me was they were saying that these products need to be maintained at subthermal temperatures, like some insane, temperature like negative 70 degrees. Well, really, you think some truck driver somewhere, might not have slipped up maybe and didn't set the thermostat properly? And
not for nothing, I don't want to go into Walgreens, CVS to take a vaccination. without concerning, without
No medical examination beforehand?
not talking to my doctor. You don't know my medical history, but I'm gonna walk into CVS. Oh no,
Outside the train station.
a parking lot in City Field with nurses, and I'm going to take this. No. And now I know
With
about
people who aren't even nurses, who've never even been taught how to aspirate a needle.
Yeah.
So as you could tell, Stephen, we've talked about this quite a bit.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
You guys seem rather passionate about this.
Yeah. It was. And the interesting thing is people will say, "Oh, you're obsessed with this." Well, yeah, hell yeah, I'm obsessed with not being tampered with in the way of body sovereignty. I'm obsessed with not being coerced to take medical products, and for my children to not have to deal with a world like that. So, yeah, I think it was a major transgression, and it's really weird for me to hear activists who are all about unpacking things and confronting social ills and injustices. Now they want to play cat got your tongue, sweep the elephant under the rug. Well, no, that's not what my activist training has indicated. We have to address injustices until they're fully dealt with.
Sure.
And, unfortunately, justice has not been done.
Well, that's a funny word, that word justice. When Columbus went to different islands, he erected two symbols. One was a cross to represent the Catholic faith and Christian religion, and the other was a gallows with 13 nooses to hang Indians, and the number 13 corresponding to Jesus and the 12 apostles, and that gallows was meant to represent justice, which is retribution for not obeying the authorities that have arrived.
Right.
And then you have to make amends for being on their land before they got there, type of thing. That kind of insanity, right? So the reason why the domination framework is so crucial and important in this conversation is to understand that there are 7 main concepts that serve as the context for the overall society. And so the first one is civilization, and that means the forcing of a cultural pattern on a population to which it is foreign. So there's the colonization, the invasion, right? And so the civilization is the outcome of that forcing process. And then you have state, which Max Weber referred to as, he referred to it as a relation of men dominating men. If the state is to exist, the dominated must submit themselves to the authority claimed by the powers that be. And the next one is ascendancy, which is controlling influence, governing power, domination. That's in the actual dictionary. It's one of the few words in the English language that has the domination in the definition. And then the other one is sovereignty, which Jonathan Havercroft in his book Captives of Sovereignty defines as an unjust form of political domination that limits human freedom. And he's following several different political philosophers in that definition. And then you have property, which is, I've already defined that earlier, and that's basically the framework of domination once again. And then you have dominion, which goes to dominium in Latin, which means domination. And then you have empire, the American empire. So if we understand that the root, the seed and the root, and everything that extends from the seed and the root is all looping back to domination and a manifestation and an outgrowth of domination or a claim of a right of domination, I don't want to say they have that right, but they're claiming the right, then we can begin to get at what we're really dealing with here. And one last word that's really important, too, is the word government. If you take that word and break it apart, you have go over MENT. And so the contraction, by dropping one of the O's, you get govern, and then you get MENT, which means a state or condition of. So it's a state or condition of going over others. Or you can break it apart so that it says go over men. And but the theme is the same. So when people say, well, the government, well, the domination, if they got in the habit of saying the domination is now mandating shots or mandating whatever, we would be more accurate in the way that we're expressing the English language.
Right. Well, that's excellent. I'm so thrilled to have this on my program, honestly, because it just provides us with a very helpful framework. And actually, we have a little bit of time. Brother Steven Newcomb said he'd be open to taking calls. If anyone would like to call in, you're welcome to. Please be concise. We have a distinguished scholar on the line, so try to be organized with your thoughts. This is not an open invitation to rant in this case. In some cases, I invite you to rant. I love a good rant. But today we do have a focused program. So if you'd like to join the conversation, please call 888-874-4888. 888-874-4888. I'm really sorry last week I didn't mention the phone number. I was like, hey, everyone call in, and thankfully my esteemed listeners know the phone number in the first place, but for anyone listening for the first time, I kind of messed up in that instance of not mentioning the actual phone number. 888-874-4888. That's the number to call in to this program, and please keep that on file because we are going to have callers on average. Most programs, sometimes we just frankly don't have time, but we like to have callers on this program. This is a community-based program. And of course, you know, the way you support this program is by subscribing to my Substack or buying a chess lesson through remotelearningchess.com, remotelearningchess.com, or buying a song. I'd actually love if you guys could buy the intro music to this show. That's my song. That's me singing, playing bass. I wrote that song. I produced that song with a great producer who resides in India, Rohan Solomon. There's amazing musicians featured on there. We have Ryan Waters on guitar. We have Jerome Jordan on guitar. We have Ivan Katz on drums. We have Kiara Fossey on violin. We have Lene Harris on cello. So we got a lot of folks to play on that song, and I'd so appreciate it if you bought it for $1 because I do produce this show every week, and I do have 2 young children to feed, and every little bit counts. So do we have any calls on the line, Kyle? Oh, and Stephen, while we're waiting for a call to get patched through, can you please let us know how people can follow up with your work? Well, we have a website, originalfreenations.com, and my contact information is on there. So I could be emailed at info@originalfreenations.com. But also we have my Substack, The Domination Chronicles, or Steven, how those goes. I don't have it memorized. Steven.Newcomb at Substack.com, I believe it would be. Something, whatever. You probably know that better. Yeah, we're going to find, let me find it right here. But in any case, so those are a couple ways people can get in touch. And we have a tremendous amount of information on originalfreenations.com with links provided by a dear friend, David Ratcliffe. He's got all these rabbit holes you can go down with the original source documents and so forth. It's quite an amazing array of information on there. And then we, with the Substack, I've only just started that, but I intend to place a lot more articles, post them there. So. Yeah, Stephen has a great Substack, and I highly recommend it. I am subscribed. Yeah, absolutely. So, and also special thanks to Tessalina, who connected me with Stephen. She's been a guest on the Bassline. I've had the pleasure of being her guest, and I'm so glad that she introduced us because, we owe. Yeah, she's excellent. I really treasure Tessa. She's wonderful. Right, and so I'm looking at this essay right here, The Doctrine of Domination, and Robert Jones's essay in Time magazine, Steven Newcomb, October 19th. Look that article up. It's really concise, it's very instructive, and having listened to this conversation, it will make perfect sense. So we actually have E from Edgewater. Oh, no? Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. He's the second caller. We have another caller beforehand. We have Taylor from the BX. I'm sorry. Taylor's up first. Taylor, are you with us?
Yes, she is. Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Doing fine.
Yes, what do you have for us today, Taylor? Happy Friday.
Okay, first I'd like to welcome you to the lineup. It's very much appreciated. It's
Thank
a
you so
different
much.
view,
I appreciate
and
that.
it's well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the question is addressed to all in attendance. I'd like to know, okay, let me put it this way. I'm an older person, and I've lived a moment on this earth, and I see what looks like the world going to hell in a wastebasket, as we used to say. However, I was taught from eons ago that everything happens for a reason, and that the world does indeed go through transitory changes to purify itself, and that there are no mistakes. So my question is addressed to all in attendance. So much of the commentary is negative, doomsday. I find that we leave so much of the creator out of the content, out of the planning, out of the resolution. So this is to whoever wants to answer. Where's the creator in this world? I mean, what do you think? Is that just fallacy or what? But last but not least, day follows night in my universe, and man can't do that. He can't change that. He can't touch that. He can't stop that. So why do we give so much credence to the will and the wrong of man when there is a creator? Okay, that's my question.
Thank you. Brother Blue, take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you. Hello, dear. I'm from the Bronx as well, so hello and welcome.
Hi.
I have become an atheist. So I've searched, and just through reading and lots of historical religious philosophies and the Quran and, the origins of Judaism and Christianity, I came to my conclusion a long time ago. And so there is a source, I think, that we all hail from. We're connected in so many different levels and so many profound levels. And for me, I think if we as human beings understood our connection to one another, to this planet that we live on, to the larger multiverse and the galaxies and the black holes and the stars, I think we would have a little bit more respect, instead of putting things in the hand of something unseen, but putting it into the hands of what we can do. We can plant, we can plant gardens. We can clean the oceans. We can take each other by the hand and stop warring against one another. There's more than enough land, more than enough space, more than enough food provided by this wonderful planet. And so I put things into that context. What can we do as human beings and organisms on this planet to not only protect us, but to respect and heal the planet?
Yeah, I would just say, for me, I don't identify myself as an atheist exactly, just for the simple fact that I don't want to define myself based on what I don't believe. Like, a friend of mine made an interesting point years ago. He said, being an atheist is a belief system as much as not collecting stamps is a hobby. Mm-hmm. I don't really define myself based on what I don't believe, but I would say atheist in regard to a certain Judeo-Christian framework that I don't accept, honestly, and that might disappoint certain people. But my big problem, and you didn't mention Judeo-Christianity, by the way, you just said the creator, so I don't want to attribute that to your statements.
Thank you for noticing that. That's what I was waiting to say.
Right.
I mentioned no religion.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. But I do want to say a big problem that I do have with Judeo-Christianity, which is an overarching framework here, is that I don't like the concept of sacrifice, especially now as a father. I don't really admire a deity who sacrificed his son. I would almost be compelled to be a Christian if it was a story of non-sacrifice. If they had said, we live in a world of sin because God refused to sacrifice his son, I would say, you know what? I like that story of loyalty. As fantastical as it is, I love loyalty. But when you say sacrifice your son, that's getting into psycho stuff that I don't like. We don't sacrifice folks. We stick up for each other.
All right, my brothers, I heard both of you. The first gentleman said something about he believes that there be a source that connects and sustains, and yet he deviates from that to say, oh, well, we can do for each other. But I never intimated that doing for each other was off the table.
Mm-hmm.
I was just asking about that source. Is that, you're implying that there's a source that has infinite power, but then, you just kind of transition from that to, I believe we can all do for each other, which I concur.
Mm-hmm.
But what's that source? I mean, you didn't indicate what that source is. That's
and what about
physical...
Steven? We also want to hear from Steven Newcomb, and we're running out of time.
Okay, all right. So I'll wait to listen.
But I would also say, though, and I don't want to answer for my brother Blue, but, another problem that I have with Christianity, and again, I'm not attributing that to you, but I'm talking about the dominant religion of this system of domination ultimately, is so parochial in a certain way. Like, I wonder, is there life in other galaxies, for example? Are we the only living creature in the universe? At which point I would ask, do we lecture people in distant galaxies about the story of Jesus that happened supposedly in a particular geography on this particular planet? Like, how far does this extend? I like Brother Blue's reference to cosmic things, black holes and things that are incomprehensibly large and incomprehensibly far away, because when you start talking about particular geography, like, I find it very abstract to go to an Eskimo and say your salvation is based on this story that took place in another language under another political regime and another geography. But Steven, what would you have to say before we wrap up? We literally have 1 minute.
Well, I would say that with regard to the comment about negativity, my friend Steve Venegas, a dear Kumeyaay friend, says we need both negative and positive to make a battery work. So I think in the negativity, quote unquote, that we're discussing here, it has to do with an accurate diagnosis of the harms and the wrongs that people have been suffering from. But behind it all is the initial positivity that I spoke to in the beginning, which is our original instructions and all of the ways in which the beauty of life manifests on a daily basis. And that's what we have to be thankful for all our loved ones and everyone in our life that makes our life meaningful.
Wow. How poetic and how beautiful. Thank you, Steven Newcomb,
Wonderful.
For a beautiful ending to our show. Check out this song of mine. It's called Love's in an Hourglass. It's an original tune. And I want to thank Steven Newcomb for joining us. I'd say, okay, someone asked if I could say my Substack slowly. So just look up Jeremiah Hosea, Jeremiah Hosea. Look me up on Substack. Look up Steven Newcomb, Newcomb. And go to my website, jeremiahhosea.com. We love you guys. We'll see you next week. And we have
Thank you so much, Steven.
vaccine-injured nurse, Danielle Baker, is our guest next week. So we're entering new territory. Peace and love to everybody. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
One issue.